The train lurched forward with a metal scream that rattled Clara Whitmore's bones. She pressed her forehead against the soot-stained window and watched Dry Hollow disappear into a brown smudge on the horizon. Good riddance. That miserable town had taken everything from her except the worn suitcase sitting between her boots and the last $3 folded inside her sleeve. 34 years old. Unmarried. Unwanted. Those were the facts people whispered whenever she walked past. In Dry Hollow, they didn't bother whispering anymore. Clara shifted her weight on the hard wooden bench. The seat groaned beneath her. Everything groaned beneath her. Chairs, floorboards, the patience of everyone who'd ever hired her. She'd learned to move carefully through the world, trying to take up less space, but it never mattered. People saw her body before they saw anything else. "Excuse me, ma'am?" A thin woman in a gray traveling dress stood in the aisle, clutching a small trunk. Her eyes flicked over Clara's frame with that familiar expression, half pity, half disgust. "Is this seat taken?" There were 7 empty seats in the car. Clara glanced at them, then back at the woman. "No," she said quietly. "It's yours if you want it." The woman hesitated, then moved 3 rows back instead. Clara's chest tightened, but she'd stopped crying over things like that years ago. Tears didn't change facts. She was heavy, broad-shouldered, thick-waisted. Her hands were rough from work, her face plain as flour, and her hair refused to hold a curl no matter what she did. The mirror had never been kind to her, and neither had the world. She pulled the crumpled newspaper advertisement from her coat pocket and read it for the 100th time. Help wanted. Widower with 3 children seeks housekeeper for remote ranch. Room and board provided. Must be strong, dependable, and willing to work hard. No fragile constitutions. Apply in person at Iron Creek Station. No mention of beauty. No requirement for charm or grace. Just strength and dependability. Clara had both of those, even if she had nothing else. The mail-order groom incident happened 6 years ago, but people in Dry Hollow still talked about it like it was yesterday. She'd answered an advertisement from a Montana cattleman looking for a bride, paid for her own train ticket, bought a new dress she couldn't afford, showed up at the meeting place with her heart hammering against her ribs. The man took one look at her and walked away without saying a word. Clara stood there for 20 minutes before she understood he wasn't coming back. The train station manager finally asked her to leave because she was disturbing the other passengers. She'd spent that night in a boarding house, crying so hard she vomited. When she returned to Dry Hollow, the story had already spread through town like cholera. "Did you hear? That Whitmore woman got rejected before the man even spoke to her. I heard he took one look and caught the next train east." Well, what did she expect? No man wants a wife who looks like she ate his cattle. The children were the cruelest. They'd moo at her when she walked to the general store. The adults just turned away, embarrassed to be seen near her. After that, Clara stopped hoping for marriage. She took whatever work she could find, washing laundry, scrubbing floors, cooking for boarding houses. But jobs never lasted long. Someone always complained. She ate too much. She made the other workers uncomfortable. She wasn't presentable for customer-facing work. 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Brennan, who ran the last boarding house willing to employ her, called Clara into her office. "I'm sorry, Clara," Mrs. Brennan said, though her voice carried no warmth. "Business has been slow. I need to let you go." Clara knew the truth. Mrs. Brennan's nephew had just arrived from Kansas, and he needed work. It was easier to fire the ugly woman than explain why she deserved to keep her job. "When do you need me to leave?" Clara asked. "End of the week." That gave Clara 4 days to find new work and a place to sleep. She'd searched everywhere, knocked on every door, begged, humiliated herself. Nothing. By the 4th day, she had nowhere to go and not enough money for another month's rent anywhere. That's when she saw the advertisement for the ranch job. Iron Creek was 200 miles west, deep in territory most people considered wilderness. The town barely appeared on maps. But the advertisement was real, printed in 3 different newspapers. Someone desperately needed help. Clara spent her last dollars on the train ticket. Now, as the prairie rolled past in endless waves of dead grass, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. What if the widower took one look at her and sent her away just like the mail-order groom had? What if there were other women competing for the position, younger, prettier women who actually had a chance? The train rattled on for hours. Clara tried to sleep but couldn't. Her mind kept circling the same anxious thoughts. By the time the conductor announced Iron Creek Station, Her stomach was twisted in knots. She gathered her suitcase and stepped off the train into a blast of cold wind. Iron Creek wasn't even a proper town, just a wooden platform, a telegraph office, a general store, and a few scattered buildings crouched against the enormous sky. Mountains rose in the distance like broken teeth. Clara stood on the platform, gripping her suitcase, searching for someone who might be the widower. A sign near the telegraph office read, "Ranch interviews, inside." Her heart sank. Interviews, plural. That meant competition. She walked toward the building, each step heavier than the last. Through the window, she could see 4 women already waiting inside. Young women, slender women, women wearing clean dresses and neat hair ribbons. Clara almost turned around and climbed back on the train, but she'd spent her last money getting here. There was no going back. She pushed open the door. All 4 women looked up. Their expressions shifted instantly, from curiosity to surprise to barely concealed laughter. "Oh my," one of them whispered. Another woman, blonde and sharp-featured, looked Clara up and down with theatrical shock. "Did you get lost, dear? The livestock pens are outside." The others giggled. Clara's face burned, but she forced herself to step inside. "I'm here about the ranch position." The blonde woman exchanged glances with her companions. "You? A housekeeper?" "That's right." "Sweetheart, the man's looking for someone to manage a household, not crush it." More laughter. Clara set her suitcase down carefully. Her hands were shaking. She'd spent 34 years enduring comments like this, but it never got easier. "I can work hard. I know how to cook, clean, mend, I'm sure you know how to eat," the blonde woman interrupted. "Question is, would there be any food left for the children?" The room erupted in laughter. Clara stood there, swallowing humiliation like bitter medicine. She wanted to leave, wanted to disappear, but she had nowhere left to go. This was her last chance. Before she could respond, the door behind the counter opened. A man stepped through. Clara's first thought was that he looked like a ghost. Tall and lean, with hollow eyes and a face carved by exhaustion. His clothes were clean but worn thin. His hair needed cutting. He moved like someone who'd forgotten how to rest. This was Elias Mercer. Behind him, 3 children appeared in the doorway. A girl around 10 years old stood with her arms crossed, trying to look fierce. A boy, maybe 7, clung to her skirt. And a tiny girl, no more than 5, pressed herself against the wall like she wanted to vanish into it. The children looked terrified. The blonde woman immediately brightened. "Mr. Mercer, we've been waiting so patiently." She gestured toward Clara. "Though I think someone's confused about what kind of help you're looking for." The other women tittered. Elias didn't smile. His gaze moved slowly across each woman, lingering nowhere, as though he were evaluating livestock at auction. When his eyes reached Clara, he paused. Not with judgment, not with cruelty, just exhaustion. "You're all here about the position?" he asked. "Yes," the blonde woman said quickly. "Though I must say the advertisement was a bit vague. What exactly is the salary?" "Room and board," Elias said flatly. "No wages." The women's faces fell. "No wages?" another woman protested. "Mr. Mercer, that's hardly reasonable." "The work's hard," Elias interrupted. "The ranch is isolated. Nearest town is 12 miles. Winter comes early and stays late. You'd be cooking, cleaning, mending, helping with livestock, teaching the children when there's time. If you're expecting easy work or extra money, leave now." Silence. The blonde woman recovered first, forcing a smile. "Well, I'm sure we can discuss compensation later. After all, a man in your position must be quite comfortable financially." "I'm not," Elias said. "But surely the ranch is failing," he said. "Crops didn't come in last season. Half the herd's gone. Okay, I can barely pay the bank. I'm offering work to someone who needs a roof more than wages. If that's not you, there's a train leaving in an hour." The women shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a redhead in a green dress, spoke up. "Mr. Mercer, I don't mean to be indelicate, but why would anyone take a position like this? No pay, no security, and—" She glanced at the children. 3 children to care for in the middle of nowhere? "Because I'm desperate," Elias said bluntly. "And maybe someone else is too." The brutal honesty hung in the air like smoke. The blonde woman forced another smile. "Well, I'm certainly willing to help. Though I must say I've never done ranch work before. I'm more suited to refined household management. Can you cook? Elias asked. I, I've observed cooking. Can you mend clothes? Well, can you milk a cow, churn butter, slaughter a chicken, haul water, scrub floors? His voice wasn't cruel, just tired. Because that's the work. Every day. If you can't do it, don't waste my time. The woman's face flushed with indignation. I didn't travel all this way to be insulted. I'm not insulting you, Elias said. I'm telling you the truth. This isn't an easy job. It's survival. The redhead in the green dress stood abruptly. I think I'll catch that train after all. She grabbed her bag and walked out. Another woman followed. The blonde woman hesitated, clearly torn between pride and practicality. Finally, she turned to Elias with a calculating smile. Mr. Mercer, perhaps we could discuss this over dinner? I'm sure we could come to a more agreeable arrangement. Elias's expression didn't change. I'm looking for someone to help raise my children, not someone who needs convincing to do it. The woman's smile vanished. She grabbed her things and stormed out, dragging the last remaining woman with her. Suddenly, the room was empty except for Clara, Elias, and the three silent children. Elias turned to Clara. His eyes were so tired they looked painful. And you? He asked. Clara's throat felt dry. She'd watched the entire exchange in stunned silence. Now, with everyone else gone, she realized she was the last option standing. I'm strong, she said quietly. I can work hard. I've been cooking and cleaning since I was 8 years old. I know how to manage a household, and Her voice wavered. I need this job. Elias studied her for a long moment. Not her body, not her face, her eyes. Why do you need it? He asked. Clara could have lied, could have made herself sound more appealing, but something in his exhausted honesty made her tell the truth. Because no one else will hire me, she said. Because I don't have anywhere to go. Because I've spent my whole life being told I'm not good enough for anything, and this is the only job that didn't require me to be pretty. Silence. The oldest girl, the 10-year-old, was staring at Clara with an unreadable expression. Elias glanced at his children, then back at Clara. What's your name? Clara Whitmore. Can you handle difficult work, Miss Whitmore? Yes. Can you handle isolation? Yes. Can you handle 3 frightened children who don't trust anyone anymore? Clara looked at the children, really looked at them. The oldest girl was trying so hard to be brave. The boy was trembling. The little girl looked like she wanted to disappear. These weren't children who needed a governess or a teacher. They needed someone who understood what it felt like to be terrified and alone. Yes, Clara said softly. I can. Elias studied her again. The silence stretched so long, Clara thought he might send her away too. Then he asked the question that changed everything. Will you stay if things get hard? Clara met his eyes. She thought about the mail-order groom who'd walked away without a word. She thought about every job she'd lost, every door slammed in her face, every cruel comment she'd endured. She thought about having nowhere left to run. Yes, she said, I'll stay. Elias nodded slowly. Then the job's yours. Clara's knees nearly buckled with relief. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Elias said. You haven't seen the ranch. He turned to the children. This is Miss Whitmore. She's going to be helping us for a while. The oldest girl stared at Clara with suspicious eyes. How long's a while? As long as she wants to stay, Abigail, Elias said quietly. Abigail's jaw tightened. That's what you said about the last one. Clara's stomach sank. There was someone before me? Elias's face darkened. A woman from town came out 3 months ago. Lasted 4 days before she decided ranch life was beneath her. She said Mama's house was filthy, the boy whispered. His voice was so small Clara barely heard him. Noah, Elias said gently, that's enough. But Clara saw the pain flash across his face when the boy mentioned his mother. The youngest girl still hadn't spoken. She just stared at Clara with enormous, haunted eyes. Elias picked up Clara's suitcase. Wagon's outside. It's a 2-hour ride to the ranch. If you've changed your mind, now's the time to say so. Clara looked at the 3 broken children, the exhausted widower, and the vast wilderness waiting beyond the door. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she'd been running her whole life, and it had gotten her nowhere. I'm ready, she said. They walked outside into the brutal wind. The wagon was old, the horse older. Clara climbed into the back with the children while Elias took the driver's seat. As the wagon lurched forward, Abigail leaned close to Clara and whispered, "You won't stay either. No one ever does." Clara looked at the girl's hard, defensive eyes and saw herself at 10 years old, already learning that the world was cruel and people always left. "I'm not like the others," Clara said quietly. "That's what they all say," Abigail shot back. Clara didn't argue. Words meant nothing. Only time would prove whether she was telling the truth. The wagon rolled west into the wilderness. The mountains grew larger, the wind grew colder, and Clara Whitmore, the woman no one had ever wanted, rode toward a future that would either save her or destroy her completely. She wasn't sure which one she was hoping for anymore. The ranch appeared on the horizon just as the sun began to set. Clara's first thought was that it looked like something out of a nightmare. The main house sagged in the middle, its roof patched with mismatched boards. The barn doors hung crooked. Fences lay broken and half buried in dead weeds. Trash cluttered the yard, broken tools, rotting wood, piles of unburned debris. Everything had the gray, exhausted look of something slowly dying. The wagon stopped in front of the house. Elias climbed down without a word and began unhitching the horse. Clara stared at the wreckage around her. This wasn't a ranch. This was a graveyard. "Told you it was bad," Abigail said flatly. The children climbed out and disappeared into the house without looking back. Clara stepped down carefully, her boots sinking into mud. The wind cut through her coat like a knife. She turned slowly, taking in the full scope of the disaster. "I know it's not much," Elias said quietly. That had to be the understatement of the century. "How long has it been like this?" Clara asked. Elias didn't answer immediately. He finished with the horse and started walking toward the barn. Clara followed. Inside, the barn was just as bad. Empty stalls, broken equipment, the smell of rot and neglect. "My wife died 14 months ago," Elias finally said. "Winter storm. She went out to check the animals during a blizzard, and—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. "We found her the next morning." Clara's chest ached. "I'm sorry." "After that, everything fell apart," Elias continued, his voice flat. "I couldn't think. Couldn't sleep. The children were crying every night. Abigail tried to take care of her siblings, but she was 9 years old. Noah stopped talking for 3 months. Rose—" He paused. "Rose still won't sleep in her own bed." He turned to Clara, and for the first time she saw past the exhaustion to the raw grief underneath. "I couldn't save the ranch and take care of them at the same time," he said. "So I chose them. But now we're losing everything anyway, and I don't know how to stop it." Clara looked around the barn. She thought about the broken house, the terrified children, the man standing in front of her who looked like he was barely holding himself together. This wasn't just a job. This was an impossible situation that would break most people. She should leave, should get back on that wagon and demand he take her back to the station. This wasn't what she'd signed up for. But then she thought about Abigail's hard, suspicious eyes, Noah's trembling hands, Rose's haunted silence. She thought about 3 children trying to survive in this wreckage while their father drowned in grief. "Show me the house," Clara said. Elias looked surprised. "You still want to stay?" "I said I would." Something shifted in his expression, not quite hope, but maybe the distant memory of it. They walked back to the house together. Elias opened the door, and Clara stepped inside. It was worse than she'd imagined. The main room was chaos, dirty dishes piled everywhere. Laundry scattered across furniture, dust thick on every surface. The fireplace was cold and full of ash. The floor was covered in tracked mud and debris. Clara moved through the house slowly. The kitchen was a disaster. Spoiled food, unwashed pots, a table covered in crumbs and stains. The children's bedroom had 3 narrow beds crammed together, blankets tangled and filthy. Elias's room was nearly empty, just a bed and a chair. He clearly wasn't sleeping much. And everywhere, in every corner, Clara saw evidence of the woman who used to live here. A woman's shawl draped over a chair, a pair of small boots by the door, a hairbrush still sitting on a shelf. Elias hadn't moved anything. The house was a shrine to someone who was gone. Clara returned to the main room where Elias waited. The children had vanished somewhere upstairs. "When did you last have a proper meal?" Clara asked. Elias thought about it. "I don't remember." When did the children last have clean clothes? I I try to wash things, but when did anyone clean this house? Elias's shoulders sagged. I know it's bad. The woman who came before, she took one look and left immediately, said she wasn't going to live in a pigsty. Clara walked to the cold fireplace and knelt down. The ashes were old. The wood bin was empty. Do you have firewood? She asked. There's some in the barn. Where's the well? Out back. Food stores? Root cellar, not much left. Clara stood and brushed ash from her hands. All right, here's what's going to happen. You're going to bring in enough firewood to last the night. Then you're going to show me the root cellar so I can see what we have to work with. Then you're going to sit down, and I'm going to make dinner. Elias stared at her. You don't have to start tonight, Chititsam. Yes, I do, Clara interrupted. Because those children need a hot meal, this house needs warmth, and you look like you're about to collapse. So let's start now. For the first time since she'd met him, something almost like a smile crossed Elias's face. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly. For the next 3 hours, Clara worked. She hauled water from the well until her shoulders ached. She built a fire in the hearth and got it roaring. She sorted through the root cellar and found potatoes, onions, carrots, and some dried beans. Not much, but enough. While a stew simmered over the fire, she cleared the table, washed dishes, and swept the worst of the dirt from the floor. The children appeared one by one, drawn by the smell of cooking food. Noah watched from the doorway, silent and wide-eyed. Rose crept to a corner and sat with her knees pulled to her chest. Abigail stood with her arms crossed, trying to look unimpressed. Clara didn't try to talk to them. She just worked. When the stew was ready, she ladled it into bowls and set them on the table. Dinner, she said simply. The children didn't move. Elias appeared from wherever he'd been working outside. He looked at the table, then at Clara, and something in his expression cracked. Come on, he said softly to the children. Let's eat. They came slowly, cautiously, like animals approaching a trap. Clara sat down and started eating. The stew wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling. After a moment, Noah picked up his spoon, then Rose, then Abigail. They ate in silence. The only sounds were spoons scraping bowls and the fire crackling. Halfway through the meal, Noah started crying. Elias reached for him, but the boy pulled away and ran from the table. Clara's heart broke. Abigail set down her spoon. He always does that. Why? Clara asked gently. Because this is the first time the house has felt normal since Mama died, Abigail said. Her voice was hard, but her eyes were wet. And it reminds him of what we lost. Clara looked at Elias. His face was rigid, fighting to hold himself together. This family wasn't just grieving, they were drowning in it. Clara stood. I'll check on him. She found Noah in the children's bedroom, curled up on one of the beds, sobbing into a pillow. Clara sat down carefully on the edge of the bed. She didn't touch him, didn't try to make him stop crying. She just sat there. After a long time, Noah's sobs slowed. He looked up at her with swollen eyes. I miss my mama, he whispered. I know, Clara said softly. She used to make stew, too. Did she? Noah nodded. She'd sing while she cooked, and she'd let me help stir. Clara's throat tightened. She sounds like she was wonderful. She was. Noah's voice broke again. And now she's gone and everything's wrong, and I don't know how to make it better. Clara had no easy answers, no comforting lies. So she told him the truth. Sometimes things break so badly they can't be fixed, she said. But that doesn't mean you can't build something new. It won't be the same, but it might still be good. Noah stared at her with those enormous, painful eyes. Do you promise? He asked. Clara thought about all the promises people had broken to her over the years. No, she said honestly, but I promise I'll try. Noah studied her face for a long moment. Then, to Clara's surprise, he reached out and took her hand. His hand was so small and cold. Clara squeezed it gently. Want to come finish your dinner? Noah nodded. They walked back to the table together. Elias looked up when they entered, relief flooding his face. The rest of the meal was quieter, but the terrible tension had eased slightly. After dinner, Clara cleaned up while Elias put the children to bed. She could hear his voice upstairs, low and gentle, reading something. When he came back down, he found Clara sitting by the fire, mending one of Noah's torn shirts. You didn't have to do that tonight, he said. Someone had to. Elias sat down in the chair across from her. For a moment, they just listened to the fire crackle. Thank you, he finally said. Clara looked up at him. Don't thank me yet. I've only been here 4 hours. You're still the only person who's tried this hard in 14 months. The weight in his voice told Clara everything. This man had been fighting alone for so long he'd forgotten what help looked like. Your children are terrified, Clara said quietly. I know. They don't trust anyone. I know. They think I'm going to leave just like everyone else. Elias met her eyes. Are you? Clara thought about the question carefully. She thought about the broken ranch, the grief-stricken widower, the traumatized children. She thought about how hard this was going to be. But she also thought about Noah's small hand in hers, about Abigail's desperate need for someone to stay, about Rose's haunted silence. No, Clara said. I'm not leaving. Why not? Elias asked. This place is falling apart. I can't pay you. The work's brutal. You could find something better anywhere else. Clara set down the mending and looked at him directly. Because, for the first time in my life, she said, someone needs me for what I can do instead of rejecting me for what I look like. And that's worth more than wages. Elias stared at her. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. I'm glad you're here, he said quietly. Clara nodded and went back to her mending. Outside, the wind howled across the broken ranch. Inside, the fire burned warm, and for the first time in 14 months, the Mercer house felt like something other than a tomb. Clara Whitmore had no idea if she could actually save this family, but she was going to try. Clara woke before dawn to the sound of something crashing in the kitchen. She jerked upright in the narrow bed Elias had set up for her in a small room off the main hall. For a confused moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The dying ranch, the broken family, the promise she'd made to stay. Another crash. Then a child's muffled curse. Clara threw off the blanket and hurried into the kitchen. She found Abigail standing in the middle of a disaster. A pot lay overturned on the floor, oats scattered everywhere. The girl's hands were shaking. I was trying to make breakfast, Abigail said defensively before Clara could speak. I do it every morning. Clara looked at the mess, then at the girl's exhausted face. How long have you been doing this? Since Mama died. Every morning? Someone has to. Abigail's voice cracked slightly. Papa forgets to eat unless I make him, and Noah and Rose need. She stopped, her jaw clenching. I can do it. I just dropped the stupid pot. Clara could see the girl was on the edge of tears, fighting hard not to show weakness. I'll help you clean this up, Clara said quietly. I don't need help. I know, but I'm going to help anyway. They cleaned the spilled oats in silence. When the floor was clear, Clara started fresh, measuring out oats, adding water, building up the fire. Abigail watched with her arms crossed, that defensive wall firmly in place. You don't have to make breakfast anymore, Clara said as she stirred the pot. That's my job now. What if you leave? I'm not leaving. That's what the other woman said. Abigail's voice was sharp. She said she'd stay as long as we needed her. Then she saw the house and called it a filthy hellhole and left that same afternoon. Clara kept stirring. I'm still here, aren't I? It's only been one night. Then I guess you'll have to wait and see. Abigail was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Why did you come here? You could have gone anywhere. Clara thought about how to answer. She could lie and make herself sound noble. But this girl had been lied to enough. Because no one else wanted me, Clara said simply. And I had nowhere else to go. Abigail studied her face. People were mean to you too? Yes. Because you're fat? The bluntness should have hurt, but Clara was used to it. Yes. That's stupid, Abigail said. Clara glanced at her, surprised. My mama wasn't skinny either, Abigail continued, and she was the best person I ever knew. So people who judge like that are just stupid. Something warm bloomed in Clara's chest. Your mama sounds like she was smart. She was. Abigail's voice went quiet. She knew everything. How to garden, how to sew, how to make medicine from plants. She could fix anything, and she never yelled at us even when we were bad. The girl's eyes filled with tears. I don't remember what her voice sounds like anymore. I try and try, but I can't hear it. Clara's throat tightened. She set down the spoon and turned to face Abigail fully. "That's the hardest part of losing someone," she said. "The way they start disappearing piece by piece. First their voice, then their smell, then the exact way they smiled, until you're left holding memories that feel more like dreams." Abigail wiped her eyes roughly. "Does it ever stop hurting?" Clara wanted to say yes, wanted to offer comfort, but she'd promised this girl honesty. "I don't know," she said. "I've never lost anyone the way you've lost your mother, but I think maybe the hurt just becomes part of you, and eventually you learn to carry it." Abigail stared at her for a long moment. Then, so quietly Clara almost missed it, she said, "I'm glad you're here." Before Clara could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Elias appeared, looking like he'd barely slept. Behind him came Noah, rubbing his eyes, and Rose clutching a rag doll that had seen better days. "Something smells good," Elias said, surprise evident in his voice. "Breakfast," Clara said. "Sit down, all of you." They ate together as pale light began filtering through the dirty windows. The children were quiet, stealing glances at Clara like they still couldn't quite believe she was real. Elias ate mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere. When the meal was finished, Elias stood. "I need to check the fences in the north pasture. I'll be gone most of the day." "Wait," Clara said. "Before you go, I need to know what supplies we have. Food, soap, fabric for mending, anything." Elias looked overwhelmed by the question. There's some things in the root cellar. Some flour in the pantry, I think. My wife used to keep track of all that. Can you show me?" He led her through the house, pointing out storage areas he clearly hadn't organized in months. The pantry was chaos. Half-empty sacks, jars with unidentifiable contents, everything covered in dust. The root cellar was better but still badly depleted. The soap supply was almost gone. There was no spare fabric, no thread, no buttons. "When's the last time you went to town for supplies?" Clara asked. Elias rubbed his face. 2 months? Maybe 3? We need things. Basic things. "I know. He trailed off, looking lost. "I've been trying to keep the ranch running. There's never enough time." Clara saw how close to breaking he was. She'd seen that look in the mirror often enough, the exhaustion that went beyond the physical, down into the soul. "All right," she said, "make me a list of what the ranch needs. I'll make a list of household supplies. We'll figure out what's most urgent. I don't have money for both. Then we'll prioritize." Elias looked at her with something like gratitude. "Thank you." After he left, Clara spent the morning taking inventory of the house. It was worse than she'd thought. Nearly everything was worn out, broken, or missing. The children's clothes had more patches than original fabric. The bedding was threadbare. Half the dishes were cracked. The whole house felt like it was held together with hope and stubbornness. She found Rose sitting in a corner of the main room, rocking her doll and humming tunelessly. "Hello, sweetheart," Clara said softly. Rose looked up with those huge, solemn eyes but didn't speak. Clara had learned not to push. The child would talk when she was ready. Instead, Clara sat down nearby and started sorting through a pile of mending. After a while, Rose scooted closer, then closer again. Finally, she was sitting right next to Clara, watching her work. "Your doll is very pretty," Clara said. Rose held up the doll. It was missing one arm and most of its hair. "What's her name?" Clara asked. Rose's lips moved, but no sound came out. Clara waited patiently. "Mama made her," Rose finally whispered. Her voice was so small and unused it barely qualified as sound. "Did she?" Rose nodded. "Before the snow came. She said every girl needs a special friend." Her eyes filled with tears. "But then Mama went outside and didn't come back, and now the doll is broken, and I can't fix her, and everything's broken, and—" Her words dissolved into sobs. Clara set down her mending and carefully, slowly opened her arms. Rose hesitated only a second before throwing herself into Clara's lap, crying so hard her whole body shook. Clara held her and let her cry. No platitudes, no false promises, just solid presence. Noah appeared in the doorway, watching with worried eyes. "Is Rose okay?" he asked. "She's sad," Clara said. "Sometimes we need to cry." "I cry a lot too," Noah admitted. "Abigail says I'm being a baby." "Crying doesn't make you a baby. It makes you human." Noah considered this. Then he came and sat next to Clara, too. She put one arm around him while still holding Rose. They sat there together for a long time. Three people who barely knew each other, holding on to each other like drowning victims clutching driftwood. Eventually, Rose's sobs quieted. She pulled back and wiped her face with her sleeve. "Can you fix my doll?" she asked Clara. Clara examined the damaged toy. "I'll try, but I need some fabric scraps and thread." "We don't have any," Noah said. "Papa said we can't buy anything extra." Clara thought for a moment. Then she went to her own room and opened her battered suitcase. Inside were her few possessions, 3 worn dresses, some undergarments, a shawl, and a small sewing kit she'd carried for years. She pulled out one of the dresses. It was old and faded, but the fabric was still good. With a deep breath, she took her scissors and cut a long strip from the hem. When she returned, Rose's eyes went wide. "That's your dress." "I have others," Clara said. It was a lie. She only had 2 dresses now, and both were worn thin. But Rose needed this more than Clara needed fabric. She spent the next hour carefully reconstructing the doll's arm, using the fabric and some stuffing she pulled from an old pillow. Rose watched every stitch with intense concentration. Noah drifted away and came back several times, bringing things he thought might help. A button, a piece of string, a bent nail that turned out to be completely useless, but which Clara praised anyway. When the doll was finished, Clara handed it to Rose. The little girl held it like treasure. "She's perfect." "She's not perfect," Clara corrected gently. "But she's whole again. Sometimes that's enough." Rose looked up at her with such pure gratitude it made Clara's eyes sting. "Thank you, Mama Clara," Rose whispered. The room went still. Clara's breath caught. "Oh, sweetie, I'm not—" "I know you're not our real mama," Rose interrupted, her voice still small but certain. "But you're nice like she was. So can I call you that anyway?" Clara looked at the child's hopeful face and felt something crack open inside her chest. She'd spent 34 years being unwanted, unloved, invisible. And now this traumatized little girl was asking if she could call her mama. "Yes," Clara said, her voice thick. "You can call me that if you want." Rose smiled. It was the first smile Clara had seen from her. Noah tugged at Clara's sleeve. "Can I call you that too?" "If you want to." "What about me?" Abigail's voice came from the doorway. She was trying to sound casual, but Clara could hear the vulnerability underneath. "Yes," Clara said. "All of you. If that's what feels right." Abigail's hard expression softened just slightly. She didn't smile, but she nodded. For the rest of that day, Clara worked like someone possessed. She scrubbed floors until her hands were raw. She washed every piece of fabric she could find and hung them outside to dry. She organized the pantry, cleaned out the fireplace, and patched 3 separate holes she found in the walls. The house was still a wreck, but it was a slightly more manageable wreck. When Elias returned at sunset, dirty and exhausted, he stopped in the doorway and stared. "What happened?" he asked. "I cleaned," Clara said simply. She was covered in grime and sweat, her hair escaping its bun, her dress filthy. Elias looked around slowly. The floor was visible. The dishes were clean. The windows let in actual light. "I didn't ask you to do all this," he said. "I know." "You've been here 2 days." "Yes." He shook his head in disbelief. "The last woman wouldn't even stay 2 hours." "I'm not the last woman." Elias studied her face. Clara couldn't read his expression. Then he said, very quietly, "No, you're not." That night, over another simple dinner, Noah announced that he and Rose had decided to call Clara Mama Clara. He said it proudly, like he expected praise. Elias's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He looked at Clara with something like panic. "Is that all right?" Clara asked carefully. "I didn't ask them to. They chose it themselves." Elias set down his fork. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Clara braced herself for anger or rejection. Instead, he said, "Their mother would have liked you." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." His voice was rough. "Sarah always said the measure of a person wasn't what they looked like or how much money they had. It was how they treated people nobody else cared about." He met Clara's eyes. "She would have liked you very much." Clara's throat closed up. She couldn't speak. Abigail broke the silence. "Mama would have made you help with her garden. She made everyone help with the garden." "I hated the garden," Noah added. "All those bugs." You didn't hate it, Abigail corrected. You just hated the beetles. The beetles were huge. They were normal-sized beetles, you baby. I'm not a baby? The siblings bickered good-naturedly while Elias and Clara sat in silence. It was the most normal dinner had felt since Clara arrived. For just a moment, the house felt less like a tomb and more like a home. But that night, after the children were in bed, Clara heard sounds from Elias's room. She stood in the hallway, listening to muffled sobs that the man was clearly trying to hide. She wanted to go to him, wanted to offer comfort, but she barely knew him, and grief was such a private thing. So she went to her own room and lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to a widower cry for the wife he'd lost. The days began to blur together. Clara rose before dawn, made breakfast, cleaned, cooked, mended, and collapsed into bed after dark. The work was endless and brutal. Her hands developed fresh blisters on top of old calluses. Her back ached constantly. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose because she always made sure the children ate their fill first. But slowly, gradually, the house began to transform. The kitchen became functional. The floors stayed clean. The windows sparkled. The children's clothes were mended and organized. Clara planted a small herb garden using seeds she found in Sarah's abandoned supplies. She even managed to bake bread, though the first 3 loaves came out like rocks. The children transformed too. Noah started talking more. He followed Clara around like a puppy, asking endless questions and telling her rambling stories that rarely made sense, but which Clara listened to anyway. Rose began sleeping through the night. She still carried her repaired doll everywhere, but she smiled now, actually smiled. And Abigail, stubborn, defensive Abigail, slowly began to let her guard down. She stopped pretending to be an adult and started acting like the 10-year-old she was. She played with her siblings. She laughed. She even cried when she needed to instead of holding everything inside. But Elias remained distant. He worked from dawn to dark, fixing fences, tending what was left of the livestock, trying to salvage the failing ranch. He ate the meals Clara prepared and thanked her politely. He was kind to his children, but there was a wall around him that nobody could breach. Clara understood. He was still in love with a ghost. 3 weeks after Clara's arrival, a storm hit. Not snow, it was too early for that, but a vicious wind and rain system that battered the ranch for 2 days straight. The house leaked in 7 different places. Clara spent hours running between buckets, emptying them before they overflowed. On the second night, the barn door blew open. Elias grabbed his coat. I need to secure it before the animals panic. I'll help, Clara said. You don't have to. I'm helping. They ran through the rain together. The wind was so strong Clara could barely stay upright. By the time they reached the barn, they were both soaked through. The animals were terrified. The 2 remaining cows lowing frantically, the chickens squawking, the horse kicking its stall. Elias worked to calm them, while Clara fought to close the heavy barn door. It took both of them to wrestle it shut and secure the latch. They stood there in the barn, dripping water, breathing hard. The storm howled outside like something alive. Thank you, Elias said. You've said that about 100 times since I got here. Because I mean it 100 times. Clara wrung water from her hair. Your wife must have been strong to manage all this. Elias's expression shuddered. She was. Tell me about her. Why? Because your children are starting to forget her, and they need to remember. Elias turned away. I can't. Why not? Because it hurts too much. His voice cracked. Because every time I think about her, I remember finding her body in the snow. I remember her hands frozen to the fence she was trying to fix. I remember... He stopped, his breathing ragged. Clara stepped closer. You can't protect your children from grief by refusing to talk about their mother. All you're doing is teaching them that love dies when people die. Is that what you want? Of course not. Then tell them about her. Tell them the good things. Tell them the silly things. Tell them everything so she stays alive in their memories even though she's gone. Elias turned to face her. His eyes were wet. How do you know all this? You said you've never lost anyone. I haven't lost someone to death, Clara said quietly. But I've lost things too. I've lost hope. I've lost the belief that anyone would ever want me. I've lost years of my life to cruelty and rejection. And I learned that pretending the pain doesn't exist just makes it worse. They stood there in the lamplight, with rain drumming on the roof and animals shifting in their stalls. Sarah used to sing, Elias said suddenly. All the time. She had a terrible voice, couldn't carry a tune to save her life, but she didn't care. She'd sing while she cooked, while she gardened, while she put the children to bed. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. It drove me crazy sometimes, but now the house is so quiet, I'd give anything to hear it again. What else? Clara asked gently. She was stubborn, refused to ask for help even when she needed it. One winter she got pneumonia and tried to keep working anyway. I had to physically carry her to bed. He shook his head. She was furious with me for a week. What else? And slowly, painfully, Elias began to talk. He told Clara about Sarah's terrible cooking when they first married, about how she'd once tried to knit him a sweater, and it came out with 3 armholes, about how she'd cry during thunderstorms but face down wolves without flinching, about how she'd wanted 5 children, but they'd only managed 3 before complications from Rose's birth made more impossible. He talked until his voice was hoarse, until the storm outside began to ease, until the pain on his face looked a little less raw. When he finally stopped, his eyes met Clara's. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For making me remember. For reminding me that she was a person, not just a wound." Clara nodded. "Your children need to hear these stories too." "I know." He paused. "Will you help me? Will you sit with us while I tell them?" Of course. They walked back to the house through the dying storm. Inside, they found all 3 children awake and clustered at the top of the stairs, clearly worried. "We're fine," Elias assured them. "The barn's secure." "You were gone so long," Abigail said. "We were talking," Claire said, "about your mother." The children went very still. Elias took a deep breath. "I haven't talked about her much since she died. That was wrong of me. So if you want to hear stories about Mama tonight, I'll tell you as many as you want." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Rose came down the stairs and took her father's hand. "Tell us the one about the 3-armed sweater," she said. Elias looked surprised. "How do you know about that?" "Mama told us. She said it was the ugliest thing anyone ever made, but you wore it anyway because you loved her." "I did." Elias smiled, a real smile, sad but genuine. "I wore that hideous sweater for 3 years until it finally fell apart." They gathered by the fire, all 5 of them. And Elias told stories about Sarah until the children's eyes grew heavy. Clara listened quietly, watching this broken family begin to knit itself back together. When the children finally fell asleep, Elias carried them upstairs one by one. When he came back down, he found Clara banking the fire. "You should rest," he said. "You've been working nonstop for weeks. So have you." "It's my ranch. It's my job." He studied her in the firelight. "It's more than a job now, isn't it?" Clara didn't answer right away. She thought about Noah's stories, Rose's trust, Abigail's slowly lowering walls. She thought about the way this place had begun to feel less like exile and more like belonging. "Yes," she finally said. "It is." Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm glad you stayed." "So am I." They stood there in comfortable silence. Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, something fragile and new was beginning to grow. But neither of them knew that the real test was still coming, because the town had started to notice Clara Whitmore, and they didn't like what they saw. The first time someone from town came to visit, Clara was outside beating rugs on the clothesline. 6 weeks had passed since her arrival, and the house had transformed so completely that even Elias had stopped looking surprised when he came in from the fields. Clara heard the wagon before she saw it. She turned, shielding her eyes from the sun, and watched a well-dressed woman climb down. The woman was maybe 50, with silver-streaked hair pinned in an elaborate style, and a dress that cost more than Clara had earned in a year back in Dry Hollow. "Hello?" the woman called out. Her smile was tight. "I'm Mrs. Caroline Fletcher from town." Clara set down the rug beater and wiped her dusty hands on her apron. "Clara Whitmore, can I help you?" Mrs. Fletcher's eyes traveled slowly over Clara's body, lingering on every unflattering detail. The woman's smile never wavered, but her eyes went cold. "I heard Elias Mercer had hired help," Mrs. Fletcher said. "I wanted to come see for myself." Something in her tone made Clara's spine stiffen. "See what exactly?" "Oh, just checking on the children. We worry about them, you know. After their poor mother died." Mrs. Fletcher's gaze slid past Clara toward the house. Is Mr. Mercer home? He's mending fences in the west pasture. I see. And you're here alone with the children? That's my job. Mrs. Fletcher's smile sharpened. Your job. Yes. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, where exactly did you come from? Dry Hollow. And you're unmarried? Clara's stomach twisted. She knew exactly where this was going. Yes. How interesting. Mrs. Fletcher took a step closer. So an unmarried woman is living in a house with a widower and his 3 children. That's quite an arrangement. It's employment, Clara said flatly. I'm the housekeeper. Of course you are. The words dripped with false sweetness. I'm sure that's all it is, though you can understand how it might look to people. A woman of your circumstances, living with a grieving widower. Heat flooded Clara's face. There's nothing improper happening here. I didn't say there was, dear. I'm simply concerned about appearances. You see, we have standards in this territory, morals. And when people see an unmarried woman living with a man, I'm the housekeeper, Clara repeated, her voice harder now. I cook and clean and care for the children, that's all. Mrs. Fletcher's eyes glittered. Then you won't mind if I speak with the children, just to make sure they're being properly cared for? Before Clara could respond, the front door opened. Abigail stepped out, followed by Noah and Rose. Who's that? Noah asked. Mrs. Fletcher from town, Clara said. She's just leaving. Oh, I don't think so. Mrs. Fletcher moved toward the children with that same false smile. Hello, dears. I knew your mother. Such a lovely woman. I wanted to see how you're doing. Rose immediately hid behind Clara's skirts. Noah edged closer to his sister. Abigail stood her ground, eyes narrowed. We're fine. Are you? Is this woman treating you well? Mama Clara's nice, Noah said. Mrs. Fletcher's expression flickered. Mama Clara? You call her that? That's what we call her, Abigail said defensively. Is that a problem? Well, it's just unusual. She's not your mother, dear. We know that, Abigail snapped. We're not stupid. Abigail, Clara said quietly, don't be rude. But Mrs. Fletcher looked pleased by the outburst. I can see there's quite a bit of confusion here. Children need proper guidance, especially after losing a parent. They shouldn't be encouraged to replace their mother with... She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. Clara felt something cold settle in her chest. I think you should go now. I'll go when I'm ready. Mrs. Fletcher turned back to the children. If any of you ever need help, or if you feel unsafe, you can come to town and find me. Do you understand? We don't need help, Abigail said. We have Mama Clara. For now, Mrs. Fletcher said. But arrangements like this rarely last. Mark my words. She climbed back into her wagon and drove away, leaving Clara standing there with 3 confused children and a growing sense of dread. What did she mean? Noah asked. What arrangements? Nothing, Clara said. She's just nosy. Come on, let's get back inside. But she couldn't shake the cold feeling that had settled over her. That evening, when Elias came home, Clara told him about the visit. He listened with a deepening frown. Caroline Fletcher is married to the territorial magistrate, he said. She's also the biggest gossip in 3 counties. What does that mean? Elias rubbed his face. It means she's going to tell everyone in town about you, about us, about this situation. But there's nothing wrong with this situation. You're an unmarried woman living with a widower. In some people's minds, that's scandal enough. He paced the room. I should have thought about this. Should have realized how it would look. You needed help. I needed work. That's all this is. I know that. You know that. But people like Caroline Fletcher don't care about facts. They care about appearances. He stopped pacing and looked at her. If this becomes a problem, if people start talking, then let them talk, Clara interrupted. I've survived worse than gossip. But Elias's expression remained troubled. It's not you I'm worried about. It's the children. If the town decides this situation is immoral, they could try to remove them from my care. Clara's blood went cold. They wouldn't. They might. It's happened before. When parents are deemed unfit, the county can place children in orphanages or with other families. His voice was rough with fear. I can't lose them too. The next few days passed in tense quiet. Clara tried to focus on her work, but she kept thinking about Mrs. Fletcher's cold eyes and thinly veiled threats. Then, A week later, 2 more women from town arrived. They came separately but with the same purpose. Both asked invasive questions. Both examined the house like they were looking for evidence of sin. Both left with tight smiles and judging eyes. After the second visit, Rose started having nightmares again. Noah became clingy and anxious. Abigail grew increasingly defensive, snapping at everyone. "I don't like those women," Rose whispered to Clara one night. "They look at you mean." "They're just concerned," Clara lied. "No, they're not. They're mean." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "Are they going to make you leave?" "No, sweetheart. But that lady said our arrangement won't last." "What did she mean?" Clara pulled Rose into her lap. "Some people don't understand that families can look different. They think there's only one right way to do things." "But you make Papa smile again," Rose said. "He didn't smile for so long after Mama died, and now he does. That's good, isn't it?" Clara's heart clenched. She hadn't realized Elias had been smiling more. She'd been too focused on keeping the household running to notice. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. "That's good." But that night, lying in her narrow bed, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what Rose had said, about Elias smiling, about the children calling her Mama Clara, about how this broken house had started to feel like home, and she realized with growing horror that she'd made a terrible mistake. She'd let herself care too much. The next morning, Clara was in the garden when she heard hoofbeats. She looked up to see a man in a dark suit riding toward the house. Everything about him screamed authority, from his straight-backed posture to the badge pinned to his vest. Sheriff Thomas Ridgway dismounted with practiced ease. He was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and hard eyes that had seen too much. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm looking for Elias Mercer." "He's in the barn," Clara said, her mouth suddenly dry. The sheriff studied her with the same evaluating look the town women had used. "And you are?" "Clara Whitmore, the housekeeper." "I see." He turned toward the barn without another word. Clara abandoned the garden and followed him. She found Elias repairing a broken harness. He looked up when they entered, and his face went pale when he saw the sheriff. "Tom," Elias said carefully, "what brings you out here?" "We need to talk," Sheriff Ridgway said. "There's been some concern in town about your living situation." Elias set down the harness slowly. "My living situation? You've got an unmarried woman living in your house. People are talking. People are always talking. This is different. Calvin Reeves has received several complaints, formal complaints, about the moral character of your household." Clara's stomach dropped. Calvin Reeves. The territorial magistrate. Mrs. Fletcher's husband. "There's nothing immoral about my household," Elias said, his voice tight. "I'm not saying there is, but appearances matter, and right now it appears that you've got a woman living here in a capacity that's unclear." "She's my housekeeper, that's all." The sheriff glanced at Clara, then back at Elias. "Your children call her Mama. That's what I've been told." "So what? They're children. They needed—" Elias stopped, his jaw clenching. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" "I'm not accusing you of anything, but Magistrate Reeves is concerned about the children's well-being. He's asked me to conduct a preliminary investigation." "An investigation?" Elias's voice rose. "Into what?" "Into whether this living arrangement is appropriate for children." Sheriff Ridgway's expression softened slightly. "Look, Elias, I'm not trying to cause trouble, but if this goes to a formal hearing, things could get ugly. The magistrate has the authority to remove children from homes deemed morally unsuitable." Clara felt like the ground was dropping away beneath her feet. "You can't be serious," Elias said. "I wish I wasn't. But you need to understand, Caroline Fletcher has been very vocal about this situation. She's convinced half the town that something improper is happening here, and whether it's true or not doesn't matter. What matters is perception." "I don't care about perception. I care about my children." "Then you should care about perception," the sheriff said bluntly. "Because if this goes to a hearing and the magistrate rules against you, your children will be placed in the county orphanage until suitable guardians can be found." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Elias looked like he'd been punched. "You're telling me I could lose my children because I hired a housekeeper? I'm telling you that the law cares about propriety, and right now your situation doesn't look proper." The sheriff glanced at Clara again. "No offense, ma'am." Clara couldn't speak. Her throat had closed completely. What do I need to do? Elias asked. His voice had gone flat and dead. That's between you and the magistrate. But if I were you, I'd think about making some changes before this becomes official. Sheriff Ridgway paused. I'll be back in 2 days to interview the children. Make sure they're clean, fed, and presentable. And Miss Whitmore, it might be best if you made yourself scarce during that visit. He left without waiting for a response. Clara and Elias stood in the barn, both frozen. This is my fault, Clara finally said. I should leave. No. Elias, they're going to take your children. I know what they're threatening, his voice cracked. But you leaving won't fix this. It'll just prove that we were doing something wrong, and we weren't. Then what do we do? Elias turned away, his shoulders rigid. I don't know. That night, Clara lay awake listening to the house settle around her. Through the thin walls, she could hear Elias pacing in his room. Down the hall, one of the children was crying. Everything was falling apart. The next morning, Clara found Abigail sitting on the porch steps, her arms wrapped around her knees. You're leaving, aren't you? The girl said without looking up. Clara sat down beside her. I don't want to. But you will, because of those stupid town people. It's more complicated than that. No, it's not. Abigail's voice was fierce. They don't like you because you're fat and because you make Papa happy and because we call you Mama. So they're making up lies to get rid of you. They're not making up lies exactly. They think you're not good enough, Abigail interrupted. Just like people thought Mama wasn't good enough because she was heavy too. People are cruel and stupid and I hate them. Clara's throat tightened. Your mother was heavy? Not as heavy as you, but heavier than most women. And people talked about it. Papa didn't care, but Mama knew. She pretended it didn't bother her, but sometimes I'd catch her crying. Abigail finally looked at Clara. That's why I liked you right away. Even when I pretended not to, because you reminded me of her. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. I didn't know. Nobody knows. Papa never talks about it, but I remember. Abigail's own eyes were wet now. And now they're doing the same thing to you that they did to her, judging you for things that don't matter. Oh, sweetheart. Clara pulled the girl close. Abigail resisted for a second, then collapsed against her, finally letting herself be a child instead of a warrior. They sat there for a long time while morning light spread across the broken ranch. When Abigail finally pulled away, she asked, What are we going to do? I don't know yet, but you'll figure something out. Clara wanted to promise that everything would be okay, but she'd learned long ago that some promises couldn't be kept. I'll try, she said. The sheriff returned exactly 2 days later, just as he'd promised. This time he brought someone with him, a thin woman with severe features and a notebook. This is Mrs. Agnes Winters, Sheriff Ridgway announced. She's the county child welfare inspector. She's here to evaluate the children's living conditions. Clara felt sick. Elias had spent the previous 2 days cleaning every inch of the house that Clara hadn't already cleaned. The children were scrubbed and dressed in their best clothes. Everything looked perfect, but Clara knew it wouldn't matter. Mrs. Winters walked through the house with her notebook, writing constantly. She examined the kitchen, the bedrooms, the pantry. She checked for dust in corners and peeked into cupboards. The house appears clean, she said grudgingly. Better than I expected, given the circumstances. Given what circumstances? Elias asked tightly. Mrs. Winters didn't answer. She turned to the children instead. I need to interview each of you separately. The children looked terrified. Is that necessary? Elias asked. It's procedure, Mrs. Winters said, unless you have something to hide. Elias's hands clenched into fists, but he nodded. Mrs. Winters took Abigail first, leading her into Elias's bedroom and closing the door. Clara could hear the murmur of voices, but couldn't make out words. 15 minutes later, Abigail emerged. Her face was flushed and angry, but she wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Noah went next. He came out crying. Rose refused to go at all. She clung to Clara's leg and screamed when Mrs. Winters tried to separate them. This is exactly the kind of inappropriate attachment I was warned about, Mrs. Winters said coldly. She made a note in her book. She's 5 years old and you're a stranger, Clara said. Of course she's scared. Nevertheless, this level of dependence on a non-family member is concerning. I'm not a non-family member, Clara said before she could stop herself. She caught Elias's warning look and stopped, but it was too late. Mrs. Winter's eyes sharpened. "You're what, Miss Whitmore?" Clara's mouth went dry. "I'm the person who's been taking care of these children for 2 months. "Yes, you are," Mrs. Winters made another note. "And that's part of the problem." After what felt like hours, Mrs. Winters and the sheriff finally left. But not before Mrs. Winters delivered her verdict. "The children appear physically healthy," she said. "The house is clean. However, I have serious concerns about the emotional environment. The children display inappropriate attachment to Miss Whitmore and confusion about family roles. Additionally, there are questions about the propriety of the living arrangement itself." "What does that mean?" Elias asked. "It means I'll be recommending a formal hearing with Magistrate Reeves. He'll make the final determination about whether this household is suitable for children." "When?" "1 week from today. You'll receive official notice." Mrs. Winters looked at Clara with undisguised contempt. "I'd suggest you use that time to reconsider your position here, Miss Whitmore, for the children's sake." After they left, the house fell into stunned silence. Then Noah started crying again. Rose joined him. Even Abigail's fierce composure cracked. Elias gathered all 3 children into his arms, holding them while they sobbed. Clara stood apart, watching this family break under pressure that was entirely her fault. "I'm leaving," she said quietly. Elias looked up sharply. "What?" "I'm leaving. Tonight. If I'm gone before the hearing, they can't use me as a reason to take the children." "Clara, sir, it's the only way." Her voice was steady, even though her heart was shattering. "Without me here, there's no scandal, no impropriety. They'll have no grounds to remove the children." "But we need you," Noah sobbed. "No, you don't, sweetheart. You have your father. That's enough." "It's not enough," Abigail shouted. "Papa can't do everything by himself. He was drowning before you came. We all were." "You'll be fine," Clara lied. "You were surviving before me. You'll survive after." "Surviving isn't living." Abigail's face was red with fury and tears. "Don't you understand? You made us happy again. You made this feel like a home. And now you're going to abandon us just like everyone else." The accusation hit Clara like a physical blow. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm protecting you." "No, you're not. You're running away, just like that other woman did. Just like everyone does." Abigail's voice broke. "I told you I couldn't trust you. I told you that you'd leave. And I was right." She ran from the room before Clara could respond. Clara looked at Elias. "She's wrong. You know she's wrong." But Elias's expression was strange, grief and anger, and something else Clara couldn't identify. "She?" he asked quietly. "You think I want to leave? I think you've spent your whole life running from pain, and now, when things get hard, you're doing it again." His words cut deeper than any insult Clara had ever endured. "That's not fair," she whispered. "Isn't it? You said you'd stay when things got difficult. You promised." Elias's voice was rough. "But at the first real test, you're gone. I'm leaving to save your children. My children don't need saving from you. They need saving from a bunch of small-minded bigots who can't stand seeing happiness that doesn't look the way they think it should." "And how do we fight that?" Clara's voice rose. "How do we stand against an entire town? Against the law itself?" "I don't know," Elias shouted. Then quieter. "I don't know, but we figure it out, together. There is no together," Clara said, tears finally spilling over. "There's a widower with 3 children and a fat, unwanted woman who was foolish enough to think she could have a family." "You do have a family." "No, I have a job that's causing you to lose your children. That's all I've ever been. A problem people have to solve." She turned toward her room, intending to pack, but Elias caught her arm. "That's not true." Clara pulled away. "Yes, it is. It's always been true. And I was stupid to think it could be different here." She locked herself in her room and began throwing her few possessions into her suitcase. The dress she'd cut up to repair Rose's doll, the sewing kit, the spare clothes worn thin from washing, everything she owned fit in one small bag. Her whole life reduced to something she could carry. There was a soft knock on the door. "Go away," Clara said. "It's me." Rose's small voice. "Please, Mama Clara, please don't go." Clara's hand stilled. She went to the door and opened it. Rose stood there with her repaired doll clutched in her arms. Her face was swollen from crying. If you leave, who's going to fix things when they break? The little girl asked. Clara knelt down to Rose's level. Your papa can fix things. Not the way you do. He fixes buildings and fences. You fix people. Rose's eyes filled with fresh tears. You fixed me. When you came, I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't talk, and everything hurt. But you made it better. You fixed my doll, and you fixed my heart. Clara pulled Rose into her arms, feeling the child's small body shake with sobs. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered, I can't stay. I wish I could, but... Don't you love us? Rose asked. The question destroyed Clara completely, because the truth was that she did love them. She loved all of them, these broken, fierce, beautiful children and their grief-stricken father. She loved this failing ranch and this hard life. She loved it all with an intensity that terrified her. And that's exactly why she had to leave, because loving them meant protecting them, even if it meant destroying herself in the process. Yes, Clara whispered. I love you. That's why I have to go. Rose pulled back and looked at her with solemn eyes. That doesn't make sense. I know, baby, I know. But Clara had spent her whole life learning that love wasn't enough, that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was walk away before you caused more damage. She finished packing while Rose sat on the bed watching silently. When Clara emerged with her suitcase, she found all three children and Elias waiting in the main room. Nobody spoke. Clara looked at each face. Noah's devastated tears, Abigail's angry hurt, Rose's quiet despair, Elias's rigid control. I'm sorry, she said. Her voice cracked. I'm so sorry. She walked toward the door, each step feeling like she was wading through mud. She was almost outside when Abigail's voice stopped her. You know what the worst part is? The girl said. We finally let ourselves believe someone would stay, and we were wrong. Again. Clara stood with her hand on the door, unable to move forward or back. Behind her, she heard Noah start sobbing, heard Rose whisper, Please don't go. Heard Elias take a sharp breath like someone trying not to cry. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to stay, to fight. But Clara had learned long ago that wanting something didn't make it possible. She opened the door and stepped out into the darkness. The walk to town would take hours, but she couldn't stay here another minute. Couldn't watch these children's hearts break because of her. She made it maybe 20 yards before she heard footsteps behind her. Clara, wait. Elias's voice. She stopped but didn't turn around. Please, he said, don't do this. I have to. Why? Because you're scared? Because things are hard? Because you think you're not worth fighting for? Clara finally turned. Elias stood a few feet away, his face barely visible in the moonlight. I'm not worth losing your children over, she said. You don't get to decide that. They're my children, and they want you here. I want you here. He took a step closer. I know you're terrified. I know you've spent your whole life being rejected, but this is different. How? Because we're not asking you to be perfect. We're asking you to be brave, to stay and fight even when it's hard, even when the whole town turns against us. His voice dropped. Stay, Clara, please. Clara wanted to say yes, wanted it so badly her chest ached, but she'd spent 34 years learning that happy endings didn't happen to women like her. I can't, she whispered. Then she turned and walked away into the darkness, leaving behind the only family she'd ever known. Clara made it 3 miles before her legs gave out. She collapsed on the side of the road, her suitcase tumbling into the dirt beside her. The darkness pressed in from all sides. Her lungs burned, her feet throbbed in her worn boots. But none of that hurt as much as the look on Rose's face when Clara had walked out the door. She sat there in the cold dirt, hugging her knees, trying to convince herself she'd done the right thing. Behind her, in the distance, she could still see the faint glow of lamplight from the ranch house. She wondered if the children were still crying, if Elias was trying to comfort them, or if he was too angry at her to care. She wondered if they hated her now. The thought made her stomach twist. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Clara couldn't tell anymore. The sky began to lighten at the edges, turning from black to deep blue. Dawn was coming. She should keep walking, should get to town before people started asking questions, should disappear back into the anonymous life she'd had before the Mercers. But she couldn't make herself stand up. Clara Whitmore had spent her entire life running from pain, from rejection, from the constant reminder that she wasn't good enough, pretty enough, worthy enough. And every time she ran, she told herself it was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But sitting here in the dirt, alone again, she realized something. She was tired of being safe. She was tired of running. She was tired of letting cruel people decide what she deserved. The sun broke over the horizon, spilling gold across the prairie. Clara looked back toward the ranch house, now clearly visible in the morning light. Elias was right. She was scared, terrified actually, but fear had controlled her for 34 years, and where had it gotten her? Nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. Those children needed her, not because she was perfect or beautiful or what anyone expected, but because she loved them and they loved her, and that was enough. It had to be enough. Clara stood up slowly. Her body ached, her feet were blistered, but she picked up her suitcase, turned around, and started walking back toward the ranch. She'd made it maybe half a mile when she saw the wagon coming toward her. Her heart jumped. Was it Elias? Had he come after her? But as the wagon got closer, Clara realized it was someone else, an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes. He pulled the horse to a stop beside her. "You all right, miss?" he asked. "You look lost." Clara almost laughed. Lost was an understatement. "I'm fine," she said, "just heading back to the Mercer Ranch." The man's eyebrows rose. "You're the housekeeper everyone's talking about." Clara's stomach sank. "I suppose I am." The man studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "I knew Sarah Mercer, Elias's late wife. Good woman, strong, didn't care what people thought of her." He paused. "Folks gave her a hard time too, you know, because she was heavy, because she married a poor rancher instead of someone with money, because she did things her own way." Clara stared at him. "I didn't know that. Most people don't remember. They're too busy judging the next person." The man gestured to his wagon. "Need a ride back? You look like you've been walking all night." Clara hesitated. She'd planned to walk back alone, to use the time to figure out what she was going to say, but her feet were screaming and her whole body hurt. "Thank you," she said. She climbed into the wagon, and they rode in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, the man said, "You know they're having a town meeting about you tonight, right?" Clara's blood went cold. "What?" "Calvin Reeves called it. Says the whole town needs to discuss the moral situation at the Mercer Ranch." The man shook his head. "Load of horse shit if you ask me, but people love having something to gossip about." "The whole town?" "Pretty much. Meetings at the church. 6 o'clock. He glanced at her. "You planning to be there?" Clara thought about it. Every instinct told her to hide, to let Elias handle it alone, to avoid the humiliation of standing in front of the entire town while they judged her. But running away hadn't worked, and maybe it was time to stop hiding. "Yes," she said. "I'll be there." The man smiled slightly. "Good. Someone needs to stand up to Calvin Reeves and his self-righteous nonsense." When they reached the ranch, Clara thanked the man and climbed down. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to walk toward the house. The front door opened before she reached it. Elias stood there, looking like he hadn't slept at all. His eyes were red-rimmed. His hair was a mess. When he saw Clara, his expression cycled through shock, relief, and something that looked like anger. "You came back," he said. "I came back." "Why?" Clara set down her suitcase. "Because I was wrong. Because running away doesn't fix anything. Because," her voice caught, "because I love your children. And I love this ranch. And I love—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence, but Elias was staring at her like she'd just said something world-changing. Before either of them could speak again, there was a shout from inside the house, then footsteps thundering toward them. Rose burst through the door and threw herself at Clara with enough force to nearly knock her over. Noah was right behind her, wrapping his arms around Clara's waist. Even Abigail appeared in the doorway, trying to look unaffected, but with tears streaming down her face. "You came back," Rose sobbed into Clara's dress. "I knew you would. I told them you would." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered, holding all three children. "I'm so sorry I left." "Don't do it again," Noah said fiercely. "Promise you won't do it again." Clara looked over their heads at Elias. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I promise," she said. They spent the morning together, all 5 of them. Nobody mentioned the upcoming town meeting. Nobody talked about the hearing or the threats. They just existed together, holding on to each other like shipwrecked survivors clutching debris. But as afternoon approached, the tension returned. Finally, Elias said, "There's a town meeting tonight. About us." The children went still. "I know," Clara said. "Someone told me." "You don't have to go. I can handle it." "No." Clara's voice was firm. "I'm going. We're going. All of us." Elias looked uncertain. "Clara, these people aren't kind. If you stand in front of that town, they're going to say terrible things. Let them. I'm done hiding from terrible things." "But the children deserve to see their family fight for each other," Clara interrupted. "They deserve to see that we're not ashamed, that we haven't done anything wrong." Abigail spoke up from the corner. "I want to go too." "Me too," Noah said quickly. Rose nodded, clutching her doll. Elias looked at his children, then at Clara. "Are you sure about this?" "No," Clara admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." They spent the afternoon preparing like they were going to battle. Clara washed and mended everyone's best clothes. Elias shaved and trimmed his hair. The children scrubbed themselves until they shone. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they climbed into the wagon and headed toward town. The ride felt endless. Clara's stomach churned with anxiety. Beside her, she could feel the children's fear. Even Elias looked tense, his jaw tight. "What are we going to say?" Noah asked quietly. "The truth," Clara said. "That's all we can do." "What if they don't believe us?" "Then at least we'll know we tried." When they reached Iron Creek, Clara was shocked by the number of wagons and horses already there. It looked like the entire territory had turned out for this spectacle. They walked toward the church together. People stared. Some looked curious. Others looked hostile. A few women whispered behind their hands, their eyes full of judgment. Clara lifted her chin and kept walking. Inside, the church was packed. Every pew was full, with people standing along the walls. At the front, behind a makeshift table, sat Magistrate Calvin Reeves. He was a heavy-set man with a florid face and small, mean eyes. Beside him sat his wife Caroline, looking pleased with herself. When the Mercers entered, a ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. "That's her," someone hissed. "Look at the size of her." Shameful. Absolutely shameful. Clara felt Rose's hand slip into hers. The little girl was trembling. They found seats near the front. Clara could feel dozens of eyes boring into her back. Magistrate Reeves banged a gavel on the table. "This meeting will come to order." The room quieted. "We're here to discuss a matter of grave concern to this community," Reeves continued. "It has come to my attention that Elias Mercer has been living in sin with an unmarried woman. This arrangement poses a moral threat to his 3 innocent children." Elias stood abruptly. "That's a lie." "Sit down, Mr. Mercer. You'll have your chance to speak." "I'll speak now. Clara Whitmore is my housekeeper. Nothing more. There's no sin, no immorality, no threat to my children." "That's not what we've heard," Caroline Fletcher said from her seat beside her husband. "Multiple witnesses have reported inappropriate behavior, the children calling this woman Mama. You spending time alone with her, the 2 of you living under one roof without proper supervision." "Proper supervision?" Elias's voice rose. "She's helping me raise my children. That requires us to live in the same house." "Then perhaps you should have hired a married woman," Reeves said coldly. "Or better yet, remarried yourself to provide your children with a proper mother." "I don't need anyone telling me how to raise my children." "Actually, Mr. Mercer, you do. The law gives me authority over the moral well-being of children in this territory. And right now your household is in clear violation of moral standards." The crowd murmured agreement. Clara felt her heart pounding. This was going even worse than she'd feared. Then Abigail stood up. "That's not true," the girl said. Her voice was small but clear. Everyone turned to stare. "Abigail, sit down," Elias said quietly. "No." Abigail walked to the front of the church, her whole body shaking. "You're lying about Mama Clara, and I'm not going to let you." Reeves looked annoyed. "Young lady, this is not—" "My real mama died," Abigail interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "She went out in a storm, and she froze to death. And we found her the next morning, and I haven't been able to stop seeing her dead face for 14 months. The crowd went silent. "After she died, everything fell apart," Abigail continued. "Papa couldn't think straight. Noah stopped talking.
Rose stopped sleeping, and I had to pretend to be grown up because someone had to keep us alive. Tears were streaming down her face now. I was 10 years old and I had to be a mother, and I was so tired and so scared, and nobody helped us. Nobody. Sweetheart, Elias started, but Abigail kept talking.
Then Mama Clara came. And she was fat and poor, and nobody wanted her, just like nobody wanted to help us. But she stayed anyway. She cooked for us and cleaned for us, and fixed Rose's doll and let me cry when I needed to, and made Papa talk about Mama again instead of pretending she never existed. Abigail turned to face the crowd directly. She didn't replace our mother, she said fiercely. She helped us survive losing her. And if you take her away, you're not protecting us. You're destroying us all over again. The girl's voice broke completely. She stood there sobbing, this small, fierce child who'd carried too much weight for too long. Clara couldn't stand it anymore. She stood and walked to Abigail, pulling the girl into her arms. "That's enough, sweetheart," she whispered. But Abigail pushed back. "No, they need to hear this. They need to know what they're doing." She turned back to the magistrate. "My mama wasn't skinny either, and people judged her for it. They said mean things. They acted like she wasn't good enough. But she was the best person I ever knew. And Mama Clara is just like her. She's kind and strong, and she loves us even though we're broken and scared and difficult." Abigail wiped her face roughly. "So if you want to take us away from Papa, if you want to send us to some orphanage where nobody will love us, then do it. But don't pretend you're doing it to protect us. You're doing it because you're cruel." The silence that followed was deafening. Calvin Reeves cleared his throat. "That's quite a speech, young lady, but the fact remains that you're a bully," someone called from the back of the church. Everyone turned. An older woman was standing. Clara recognized her as the schoolteacher. "I've taught the Mercer children," the woman continued. "Noah was nearly mute when he first came to me. He couldn't focus, couldn't learn. He was drowning in grief. But in the last 2 months, he's transformed. He's reading. He's making friends. He's laughing again." She looked at Calvin Reeves directly. "That's not the behavior of a child being harmed. That's the behavior of a child being healed." "I agree," another voice said. A rancher stood up. "I've done business with Elias for years. After Sarah died, he could barely function. His ranch was failing. He looked like death himself. But now, the fences are mended, the animals are healthy. The man looks like he remembers how to hope." He paused. "Whatever Miss Whitmore is doing, it's helping, not hurting." More people began standing. A woman in a worn dress spoke up. "My husband died 3 years ago. I know what it's like trying to raise children alone. If someone had offered me help, real help, I would have taken it gratefully. Why are we punishing this family for accepting the same thing?" "Because it's not proper," Caroline Fletcher snapped. She stood up, her face flushed. "An unmarried woman living with a widower is scandalous, regardless of whether children are involved." "Why?" Clara heard herself ask. Everyone turned to look at her. Her heart was hammering, but she forced herself to keep talking. "Why is it scandalous? Because you think something improper is happening? Or because you can't stand the idea that someone you've decided isn't good enough might actually be wanted?" Caroline's eyes flashed with anger. "How dare you?" "No, how dare you?" Clara interrupted. Years of swallowed humiliation were rising to the surface. "You came to that ranch looking for evidence of sin, not because you care about those children, but because it offends you that a fat, poor, unwanted woman might have found a place where she belongs. That's not—" "Yes, it is." Claire's voice was shaking but strong. "I've spent my entire life being judged by people like you. People who decided I wasn't worth knowing because I didn't look the way you thought I should. I've been mocked and rejected and pushed aside over and over again." She looked around the church at all the watching faces. "When I came to the Mercer Ranch, I wasn't expecting love or acceptance. I was expecting more of the same. But those children looked past what I looked like and saw who I was. They needed help, and I could give it. That's all this was supposed to be. A job." Clara's eyes found Elias. He was staring at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "But it became more than that," she continued quietly, "because they let me in. They let me be part of their family. Not because I was beautiful or wealthy or what anyone expected, but because I stayed, because I cared, because I loved them." Her voice grew stronger again. "And if that's immoral in your eyes, If love and dedication and sacrifice are wrong just because I'm unmarried and heavy and not what you think a proper woman should be, then I feel sorry for you. Because you're so busy judging people that you've forgotten what actually matters. Clara turned to Calvin Reeves. I know you have the power to take those children away. I know you can destroy this family if you want to. But before you do, ask yourself, are you really protecting children? Or are you just enforcing your own prejudices? The church had gone completely silent. Reeves's face was red. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, an old man in the back spoke up. It was the same man who'd given Clara a ride that morning. I got a question for the magistrate, he said. What exactly are you proposing as a solution here? Take the children away from their father? Send them to an orphanage? Split them up among strangers? If necessary, Reeves started. That's evil, the old man interrupted flatly. Those kids have already lost their mother. Now you want to take their father too? And for what? Because some busybodies don't like the look of his housekeeper? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I'm trying to uphold moral standards, Reeves tried again. You're trying to uphold your wife's gossip, someone else called out. Caroline Fletcher stood, her face scarlet. This is outrageous. No, what's outrageous is dragging a grieving family through this circus, a woman shouted back. The meeting was dissolving into chaos. People were arguing with each other, some defending Clara and Elias, others insisting that propriety mattered. Reeves banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! Order! The crowd slowly quieted. Reeves looked furious. He'd expected easy agreement, not rebellion. This meeting will reconvene in 3 days, he announced, at which time I will make my official ruling about the Mercer household. Until then— Wait, Elias said. He stood up, pulling Rose and Noah with him. Abigail was still standing beside Clara. Wait, he repeated. Before you make any ruling, I want to say something. Reeves looked like he wanted to refuse, but the crowd was watching. Fine, speak. Elias looked at his children, then at Clara. When he spoke, his voice was clear and steady. Sarah died 14 months ago, and for 14 months I've been drowning. Not just in grief, but in guilt. Guilt that I couldn't save her. Guilt that I couldn't hold my family together. Guilt that I was failing my children every single day. He paused, his jaw working. When Clara came to our ranch, I didn't expect much. I'd already been rejected by multiple women who took one look at the disaster we were living in and left. I thought she'd do the same. Elias looked directly at Clara. But she didn't. She stayed. She worked harder than anyone I've ever known. She brought life back into a house that had become a tomb. She gave my children hope again. She gave me hope again. His voice dropped, and somewhere along the way, I fell in love with her. The church erupted in gasps and whispers. Clara's heart stopped. She stared at Elias in shock. I know that complicates things, Elias continued, speaking now to the magistrate. I know it makes your judgment more difficult, but I'm not going to lie about it anymore. I love her. Not because she's beautiful, though she is to me. Not because she's convenient, but because she's the strongest, kindest, most dedicated person I've ever known. He turned back to Clara, his eyes bright. I should have told you before. Should have been brave enough to say it when you tried to leave. But I'm saying it now in front of everyone. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The entire church was staring at them. So here's what I'm proposing, Elias said, addressing the crowd now. If the only way to keep my family together is to make this situation proper in your eyes, then that's what I'll do. He looked at Calvin Reeves. I'm asking Clara Whitmore to marry me. Right here, right now, in front of all of you. The church exploded in noise. Some people cheered. Others protested. Caroline Fletcher looked like she might faint. Clara just stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Elias crossed to her. He took her hands, his eyes searching her face. I'm sorry I'm doing this in front of everyone, he said quietly, though people were still shouting around them. I'm sorry it's not romantic or private, but I need you to know. I'm not asking because of the law. I'm not asking to make them happy. I'm asking because I want you in my life, permanently, as my wife, as the mother of my children. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Elias. You don't have to answer now, he said quickly. If you need time— Yes, Clara interrupted. Yes, I'll marry you. Elias blinked. Yes? Yes.
For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Elias pulled her into his arms, and the church around them ceased to matter. When they broke apart, Clara realized the children were surrounding them. Abigail was crying and smiling at the same time. Noah was bouncing on his toes. Rose was clutching Clara's skirt with both hands. "Does this mean you're staying forever?" Rose asked. "Yes, sweetheart," Clara said, her voice thick. "Forever." The shouting in the church had evolved into something else now. Most people seemed to be in favor of the sudden engagement. A few still looked skeptical, but the overwhelming response was one of approval. Calvin Reeves stood behind his table, looking like he'd just been thoroughly defeated. His wife was whispering urgently in his ear, but he waved her off. "Fine," he said loudly, banging his gavel. The crowd quieted. "If Mr. Mercer and Miss Whitmore are engaged to be married, that changes the situation. However," he held up a hand as people started to cheer, "the wedding must take place within 1 week, and until it does, Miss Whitmore will stay elsewhere. Those are my conditions." 1 week is fine," Elias said immediately. "And Clara can stay with—" He looked around helplessly. "She can stay with me," the schoolteacher said from her pew. "I have an extra room." "There," Elias said. It's settled. Reeves looked unhappy, but nodded. "Very well, case dismissed." He banged the gavel one final time, and the meeting was over. People swarmed around the Mercers immediately, some offering congratulations, others offering help with wedding preparations, a few still muttering about propriety, but they were drowned out by the majority. Clara found herself being hugged by the schoolteacher, a woman whose name she didn't even know. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," the woman whispered. Clara wasn't sure if she was talking about the speech or accepting Elias's proposal. Either way, she was too overwhelmed to respond. The next hour passed in a blur. Plans were made. Offers of help poured in. Someone volunteered to make a wedding dress. Someone else offered their home for the ceremony. The local seamstress insisted on doing the alterations for free. Through it all, Clara kept glancing at Elias, half convinced this was a dream. But every time he was there, looking at her with an expression that made her chest ache. Finally, as the crowd began to disperse, they found a quiet moment together outside the church. "Did you mean it?" Clara asked. "What you said in there?" "Every word. Even the part about loving me?" Elias cupped her face gently. "Especially that part. I thought you still loved Sarah." "I do," Elias said honestly. "I always will. She was my wife, the mother of my children, but that doesn't mean I can't love you too. Love isn't a limited resource, Clara. It grows." Clara felt tears spilling over. "I don't know how to be a wife. I've never even been courted properly. Neither do I know how to be a husband again. We'll figure it out together. What if I mess everything up? Then we'll fix it. That's what families do." Clara looked past him to where the children were talking excitedly with some other kids from town. They looked happy, actually happy. "I can't believe this is real," she whispered. "Believe it," Elias said. "You're stuck with us now." Clara laughed through her tears. "Good, because I'm not going anywhere." They stood there together under the darkening sky while Iron Creek buzzed with gossip and excitement around them. A wedding was coming. A family was being made official. And for the first time in her life, Clara Whitmore understood what it meant to be chosen, not despite who she was, but because of it. The week before the wedding passed in a chaos that Clara had never experienced before. Staying at the schoolteacher's house, a woman named Margaret Hewitt, who turned out to be far kinder than Clara expected, felt strange after months of being part of the Mercer household. Every night, Clara lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, missing the sounds of the ranch, missing the children's breathing down the hall, missing the creak of Elias moving around in the early morning darkness. But the town had rallied in a way that shocked her completely. Women she'd never met appeared at Margaret's door with offers of help. Some brought fabric, others brought food. A few brought awkward apologies for how they'd judged her before. "I'm ashamed of myself," one woman said on the third day. She was younger than Clara, with a baby on her hip and exhaustion written across her face. "When Caroline Fletcher started spreading rumors about you, I believed them. I didn't even question it. But after hearing your story and seeing those children defend you," she trailed off, her eyes wet. "My husband died last year. I know what it's like to be alone and desperate. I should have been kinder." Clara didn't know what to say to that.
So she just nodded and accepted the loaf of bread the woman had brought. But not everyone was supportive. Caroline Fletcher made sure of that. On the fourth day, Clara was in town picking up supplies when she encountered Caroline outside the general store. The older woman's face twisted with contempt. "Don't think you've won," Caroline hissed, blocking Clara's path. "You manipulated that man and those children. You played on their grief and wormed your way into a situation you had no business being in." Clara felt the old shame trying to rise up, the instinct to apologize, to make herself smaller, to accept the judgment. But she was tired of shrinking. "I didn't manipulate anyone," Clara said calmly. "I worked. I cared. I stayed when things got hard. If that's manipulation, then every mother in the world is guilty of it." "You're not their mother." "No, but I love them like I am, and they love me back. That's not something you can fake or force. It just is." Caroline's eyes flashed. "My husband should have taken those children away. This whole situation is indecent." "What's indecent," Clara said, her voice hardening, "is trying to destroy a family because you can't stand seeing an imperfect woman be happy. What's indecent is using children as weapons in your personal crusade. What's indecent is, how dare you speak to me that way?" "I dare because you don't scare me anymore," Clara interrupted. "You and your husband tried your worst. You dragged us in front of the whole town. You threatened to take away the children, and we survived it. We came out the other side stronger." She stepped closer to Caroline, meeting the woman's furious gaze directly. "I spent my whole life being afraid of people like you," Clara said quietly. "But I'm not afraid anymore, because I finally understand that your cruelty says everything about who you are and nothing about who I am." She walked past Caroline into the store, her hands shaking but her head high. Behind her, she heard Caroline sputter in rage. But Clara didn't look back. That night, Margaret asked Clara how she was feeling about the wedding. Terrified, Clara admitted. They were sitting in Margaret's small kitchen, mending the dress that Clara would wear. "What if I'm a terrible wife? What if I don't know how to do this right?" Margaret smiled gently. "Clara, you've been acting as Elias's partner for months already. The only thing changing is the legal status." "But what if—" Clara stopped, struggling to put her fear into words. "What if he realizes he made a mistake? What if he only proposed to save the children and not because he actually wants me?" "Do you really believe that?" Clara thought about the way Elias had looked at her in the church, the way his voice had cracked when he'd said he loved her. "No," she said quietly, "but I'm still scared." "That's normal. Marriage is terrifying, even under the best circumstances." Margaret set down her sewing. "Can I tell you something? My husband and I got married 40 years ago, and I spent our entire engagement convinced he was going to change his mind. I was plain, poor, and had nothing to offer. Why would he want me? But he did. He did. And we built a good life together. Not a perfect one. We fought. We struggled. We disagreed about everything from money to children to what color to paint the house. But we loved each other through all of it." Margaret's eyes were distant with memory. "He died 10 years ago, and I would give anything to have one more day with him, arguments and all." Clara felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. Love isn't about being perfect. It's not about having all the answers or never being scared. It's about choosing someone and letting them choose you back every single day." "What if I'm not good enough at choosing?" Margaret laughed softly. "Then you practice. That's all any of us can do." The night before the wedding, the children convinced Margaret to let them visit. They showed up at dusk, breathless and excited, with Elias trailing behind them, looking apologetic. "They insisted," he said. "I told them you needed to rest, but we wanted to see you," Noah finished, throwing himself at Clara. "It's been forever." "It's been 4 days," Clara said, laughing and hugging him back. "That's forever," Rose said seriously. She was clutching a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "We brought you something, for tomorrow." Clara took the bundle and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a handkerchief, hand-stitched with uneven letters that spelled out her new name, Clara Mercer. "Abigail made it," Noah announced. "She worked on it every night." Clara looked at Abigail, who was trying very hard to appear indifferent. "I just thought you should have something," the girl mumbled, "since you don't have a real wedding dress or fancy things." Clara pulled Abigail into a fierce hug. "It's perfect. Thank you." They spent an hour together in Margaret's small parlor.
The children told Clara everything that had happened in her absence, how the barn cat had kittens, how Noah had finally learned to whistle, how Rose had started a collection of interesting rocks. It felt so normal, so much like family that Clara's chest ached. When it was time for them to leave, Rose clung to Clara's neck. "Tomorrow you're coming home for real, right? Forever?" "Forever," Clara promised. After the children left, Elias lingered. Margaret tactfully disappeared into the kitchen. "Are you nervous?" Clara asked. "Terrified," Elias admitted, "but not about marrying you, about whether I can be the husband you deserve. I don't need perfect. I just need honest. I can do honest." He took her hand. "I want you to know, tomorrow isn't just about making the town happy or keeping the children safe. I would marry you even if none of that mattered. I would choose you just because you're you." Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Why?"
"Because you're the strongest person I've ever met. Because you stayed when everyone else left. Because you loved my children when they were at their most difficult. Because you saw me at my worst and didn't run." He paused. "Because when I look at you, I see home." Clara couldn't speak. She just held his hand and tried to memorize this moment, the way the lamplight made shadows on his tired face, the sound of his voice, the warmth of his calloused palm against hers.
"I love you," she finally whispered. "I don't know if I've said it out loud yet, but I do. I love you." Elias pulled her close, and they stood there in Margaret's parlor holding each other like they were the only two people in the world. The wedding took place in the same church where the town meeting had been held. Clara had worried that no one would come, that the brief surge of support had been temporary, that people would return to their judgment and gossip.
But when she arrived with Margaret, the church was full. Not everyone, of course. Caroline Fletcher and her closest friends were conspicuously absent. A few others had stayed away. But most of the town had turned out, dressed in their Sunday best. The ceremony itself was simple. The local minister, a kind-faced man named Reverend Pike, kept it brief and sincere. Clara wore the mended dress, which fit better than anything she'd ever owned. Margaret had worked some kind of magic with the alterations. Elias wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed. He looked nervous and exhausted and happy all at once. The children stood beside them as witnesses. Abigail kept wiping her eyes like she was annoyed at herself for crying. Noah bounced on his toes with barely contained excitement. Rose held Clara's handkerchief and beamed. When it came time for the vows, Clara's voice shook. "I promise to love you," she said to Elias. "Not perfectly, but faithfully. I promise to stay even when things are hard. I promise to be a partner to you and a mother to your children. I promise to choose you every single day for as long as I live." Elias's own voice was rough when he spoke. "I promise to honor you, to see you for who you are, not what anyone else thinks you should be. I promise to build a life with you that's worth all the fighting we did to get here. I promise to love you with everything I have left to give." When the minister pronounced them married, Elias kissed Clara gently. The church erupted in applause. Clara looked out at all those faces, some friendly, some neutral, a few still skeptical, and realized something profound. She'd spent her whole life waiting for everyone to approve of her, waiting to be accepted, waiting to be enough. But she'd never needed everyone's approval. She'd only needed to approve of herself. The reception was held at a neighbor's farm. Tables had been set up outside, covered with food that people had brought. Someone had rigged up lanterns. A few men brought out fiddles and started playing music. It wasn't fancy or elegant, but it was real. Clara found herself pulled into conversations with people she'd never spoken to before. Some asked about her plans for the ranch. Others shared their own stories of loss and survival. A few admitted they'd judged her unfairly and offered genuine apologies. At one point, the old man who'd given Clara a ride appeared beside her. "You did good, girl," he said gruffly. "Sarah would have liked you." "You knew her well?" Clara asked. "Well enough. She was my niece." He smiled at Clara's surprised expression. "That's right, I'm family, and I'm glad Elias found someone strong enough to help carry what she left behind." He walked away before Clara could respond, leaving her standing there with tears in her eyes. As the evening wore on, Clara watched Elias dance with each of his children. Noah stepped all over his father's feet, but grinned the whole time. Rose made Elias spin her until they were both dizzy. Abigail tried to act too grown up for dancing, but eventually gave in and let her father twirl her around. Then Elias came to Clara and held out his hand. May I? I don't know how to dance, Clara admitted. Neither do I. We'll figure it out. They swayed together clumsily while the fiddles played and the lanterns swung in the evening breeze. Clara's feet hurt, and her dress was rumpled, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten, but she'd never been happier. What are you thinking about? Elias asked. That 6 months ago I was alone in a dying town with nowhere to go and nothing to hope for. And now I have everything. Not everything, Elias said. The ranch is still failing. We're still poor. Winter's coming, and we're barely prepared. I can't promise you an easy life, Clara. I don't want easy. I just want this. They danced until the children fell asleep in various laps around the gathering, until the fiddle players grew tired, until the stars came out thick and bright above them. Finally, they loaded the sleeping children into the wagon and headed back to the ranch. Their ranch now. Their home. When they arrived, Elias carried each child to bed while Clara stood in the main room and looked around. Everything was the same as when she'd left a week ago, but somehow it felt different, more solid, more real. Elias came back downstairs and found her standing there. Welcome home, Mrs. Mercer, he said softly. Clara tested the name in her mind. Clara Mercer. After 34 years of being unwanted Clara Whitmore, she was someone new, someone chosen. The first few weeks of married life were strange and awkward and wonderful. Clara kept expecting someone to tell her she was doing it wrong, that she wasn't a good enough wife, that the whole thing had been a mistake. But nobody did. Instead, life just continued. She cooked and cleaned and cared for the children just like before. Elias worked the ranch and came home exhausted just like before. They ate dinner together and told stories and argued about small things and figured out how to share space and decisions. It wasn't magical or perfect. Some nights they went to bed frustrated with each other. Some mornings Clara woke up anxious, convinced this couldn't last. Some days Elias got quiet and distant, lost in memories of Sarah. But they kept choosing each other anyway. Winter came hard and early that year. Snow piled up fast and temperatures dropped until the cold felt like a living thing trying to get inside. Clara watched Elias grow tense as the weather worsened, knowing he was remembering the storm that had killed his first wife. One particularly brutal night, the wind howled so loud it shook the house. Rose woke up crying. Noah couldn't sleep. Even Abigail looked scared. They all ended up in the main room, huddled by the fire. Elias kept checking the doors and windows obsessively. The animals are fine, Clara told him gently. You secured everything. That's what I thought last time. I know, but you can't control the weather. All you can do is prepare and hope. Elias stood at the window, staring out at the white darkness. I can't lose anyone else. I can't go through that again. Clara went to him and took his hand. You won't. We're all here. We're all safe. You don't know that. No. But I choose to believe it anyway. They stood there together while the storm raged outside, and gradually Elias's breathing slowed. His grip on her hand loosened slightly. The storm lasted 2 days. When it finally passed, everything was buried under 3 feet of snow. It took a full day just to dig paths to the barn and the well. But the animals were fine. The house was intact, and the Mercer family had survived their first real test together. Spring came eventually, like it always does. The snow melted into thick mud. The frozen earth thawed. And Clara planted a garden using seeds she'd saved and others she'd traded for in town. The children helped, their hands dirty and their faces happy. Rose insisted on planting flowers along with the vegetables because Mama liked pretty things too. They were talking about Sarah more now. Elias had started sharing stories regularly, and the children had followed his lead. Clara learned about Sarah's terrible singing, her stubborn independence, her fierce love for her family. She learned about the woman whose place she'd taken, and instead of feeling threatened, she felt grateful, because Sarah had built the foundation. She'd loved these children first. She'd made this house a home, and Clara was continuing that work, not replacing it. One evening in early summer, Clara and Elias sat on the porch watching the sunset. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm air. The ranch is still failing, Elias said quietly. We're going to lose money again this year. I know. I don't know how to fix it. Clara thought for a moment. What if we didn't try to be a big cattle operation anymore? What if we focused on smaller things? Chickens for eggs, a bigger garden, maybe some pigs?
Things I can help manage while you do day labor for other ranchers. Elias looked at her. That's not what you signed up for. I signed up for you, for this family, for making it work however we can. It would be hard. Probably harder than what we're doing now. Then it'll be hard. Clara shrugged. I've done hard before. They sat in silence for a while. Then Elias said, You know what I love about you? What? You never pretend things are better than they are. You don't try to make me feel good with lies. You just look at reality and figure out how to survive it. Is that love-worthy? It's the most love-worthy thing I can imagine.
Clara leaned against his shoulder, and they watched their children play until the fireflies came out and the stars appeared overhead. By the end of that first year, the ranch had transformed again, not into something grand or prosperous, but into something sustainable. They kept a small herd of cattle, enough chickens to sell eggs in town, pigs that would provide meat through winter. Clara's garden flourished, producing more vegetables than they could eat. It was modest. Some might even call it poor. But it was theirs, and it was enough. The town's attitude toward them had shifted too. Most people had accepted the Mercers' unusual beginning. Clara would never be fully welcomed by everyone. There would always be people like Caroline Fletcher, who couldn't get past their prejudices. But she had friends now, real friends. Women who invited her for tea and asked her advice and treated her like she mattered. And the children were thriving. Noah had become the most talkative child Clara had ever known, chattering constantly about everything and nothing. Rose had started school and loved it, coming home every day with stories and drawings. Abigail had begun to relax into childhood, playing with friends and laughing more freely. One day in late autumn, almost a year after Clara had first arrived, Abigail came to her with a question. Mama Clara, can I ask you something? They were sitting in the kitchen, working on mending. Clara had been teaching Abigail more advanced sewing techniques. Of course. When you first came here, were you scared? Clara set down her needle. Terrified. Really? You seem so brave. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway. Abigail was quiet for a moment. I was so mean to you at first. You were protecting yourself. That's not mean. That's survival. But I told you that you wouldn't stay. I said you'd leave like everyone else. The girl's eyes filled with tears. I almost made you leave. Oh, sweetheart. Clara pulled Abigail into her lap, even though the girl was really too big for it. You didn't make me leave. My own fear did that. And I came back because I realized that running from fear doesn't make it go away. It just makes you lonely. Are you glad you came back? Every single day. Abigail hugged Clara tightly. I'm glad you're my mama. Not my only mama. I'll always have two mamas now. But I'm glad you're one of them. Clara held her and cried because sometimes joy was just as overwhelming as sorrow. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara and Elias sat by the fire. It had become their routine, these quiet evening hours where they could just exist together. Do you ever regret it? Clara asked. Marrying me? Taking on all the complications? Elias looked at her like she'd asked if he regretted breathing. Never. Not once. Even when things are hard, especially when things are hard, because that's when I need you most. He took her hand. You know what I realized recently? I thought I was rescuing you when I hired you, giving you a job when no one else would, saving you from poverty and loneliness. You were, Clara said. No, you were rescuing me. You saved my children. You saved my ranch. You saved my ability to feel anything other than grief. His voice was rough. You saved my life, Clara, and I will spend the rest of mine grateful for it. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she just kissed him and held him and tried to communicate through touch what words couldn't capture. 2 years after their wedding, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly, then all at once. She'd been tired, nauseous. Her body felt different in ways she couldn't quite name. When she finally told Elias, he went very still. Are you sure? He asked. As sure as I can be. How do you feel about it? Clara thought about Sarah, who'd nearly died giving birth to Rose, who'd wanted 5 children but couldn't have more. She thought about the risks, the dangers, the 1,000 things that could go wrong. Scared, she admitted, but happy too. Elias pulled her close. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. The pregnancy was difficult. Clara was older than most first-time mothers, and her body struggled. There were weeks where she couldn't keep food down, weeks where exhaustion pinned her to bed. The children tried to help, bringing her water and sitting with her and telling her stories to distract from the discomfort. But as her belly grew, so did the hope. A new life, a new beginning. A child who would belong to both of them, a living symbol of how far they'd come. The baby was born on a cold March morning. The labor was long and brutal, and there were moments when Clara wondered if she would survive it. But finally, after hours of agony, a small cry filled the room. A girl. Tiny and red-faced and furious at being born. Elias held her with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. She's perfect. The older children crowded around, awed and excited. Even Abigail, now 12 and trying very hard to be mature, looked enchanted. "What should we name her?" Clara asked weakly. She was exhausted beyond words, but she needed to see her family together, all of them. Rose spoke up immediately. "Hope. We should call her Hope." Everyone looked at the little girl. "Because that's what Mama Clara gave us," Rose explained. "When she came, she brought hope back. So the baby should be named that." Clara started crying. Elias was already crying. Even Noah looked suspiciously wet-eyed. "Hope," Clara repeated. "Hope Mercer." It fit perfectly. The years continued to pass. Hope grew from a baby into a toddler into a little girl with Clara's determination and Elias's quiet strength. The older children grew too. Abigail becoming a young woman, Noah losing his last traces of childhood trauma, Rose developing into a confident, joyful spirit. The ranch remained modest but stable. They never became wealthy, never had extra money for luxuries. But they had enough. They had each other. And they had something else too. A story that people told throughout the territory, about a woman nobody wanted who became the heart of a family, about a widower who learned to love again, about children who survived devastating loss and came out whole on the other side. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no magic, no divine intervention, no perfect happy ending. There were just people choosing each other over and over again, doing the work, staying through the hard parts, building something real and lasting and worth all the pain it took to get there. On Clara's 40th birthday, the whole family gathered around the table for dinner. It was a simple meal, stew and bread and vegetables from the garden, but it was abundant and warm. Hope, now 5 years old, had picked wildflowers and put them in a jar in the center of the table. "To make it fancy," she'd explained seriously. They ate together, talking and laughing and interrupting each other the way families do. At one point, Clara looked around at all of them. Elias with gray creeping into his hair, Abigail nearly grown, Noah and Rose becoming the people they'd one day be, little Hope chattering away about something that had happened with the chickens. And she felt something profound settle in her chest. This was what she'd been missing her whole life. Not perfection, not wealth or beauty or status, just this. People who knew her fully and loved her anyway. A place where she belonged. A purpose that mattered. After dinner, when the children were scattered to various activities, Elias found Clara standing at the window watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Everything," Clara said. "How I got here. How different my life could have been. How lucky I am." "Luck had nothing to do with it. You earned this." "Did I?" "Every bit of it. You could have stayed in Dry Hollow feeling sorry for yourself. You could have accepted everyone's judgment and given up. You could have run away when things got hard here. But you didn't. You fought for this. For us." Clara leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she said. "Not just for marrying me or giving me a family, but for seeing me when everyone else looked away. For believing I was worth fighting for even when I didn't believe it myself." "I love you too," Elias said. "For saving us when we needed it most. For being strong enough to stay. For teaching us that family isn't about perfection, it's about showing up." They stood there together as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. Inside the house, they could hear the children laughing about something. Hope was singing off-key while Noah played his harmonica. Rose was telling a story in her animated way while Abigail pretended not to be entertained. It was noisy and chaotic and imperfect, It was everything Clara had ever wanted and never thought she'd have. And as the darkness settled over the ranch, Clara understood something she'd spent 34 years not knowing. Worth wasn't something other people gave you. It was something you claimed for yourself. By surviving. By choosing to love even when it hurt. By staying even when leaving would be easier. She'd spent her whole life being told she wasn't enough. That she was too big, too plain, too unwanted to deserve happiness. But she'd proven them all wrong. Not by changing herself. Not by becoming someone different. But by finding people who saw her for who she actually was and loved her anyway. Clara Mercer, once Clara Whitmore, the woman nobody chose, had finally learned the truth that had eluded her for so long. She'd never needed to be chosen by everyone. She'd only needed to choose herself. To believe she was worth fighting for. To understand that the opinions of cruel people mattered far less than the love of good ones. And in the end, that made all the difference. Because sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't slaying dragons or conquering kingdoms. Sometimes it's simply staying, showing up, loving imperfectly but faithfully, building a life brick by stubborn brick even when the whole world says you don't deserve one. Clara had done that, and in doing so, she'd created something that no amount of cruelty or judgment could ever take away. A family, a home, a life worth living. And that was more than enough.